Another strong Big East performance, but what does it really mean for this UConn women's team? And does it matter? You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, I want to take a moment to say how thankful we are for all of you. We appreciate all of your support. Proud to say we're the only daily podcast covering both the UConn women's and men's basketball programs, the hoops capital of the world. And we're thrilled to bring you the coverage you deserve. So today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app, bet $5, and you get $150 of bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right. First segment of the program, UConn beat a Providence team over the weekend. Let's get Bella Tamano on the show ASAP. Here we go. All right, first things first. Before we get into UConn, what did you think of Super Bowl?
Very happy. Anytime the Chiefs lose, that's a win for me. So I definitely think the Eagles deserve that one. They outplayed them on all aspects. So I was happy about it. How about you, Mark?
I wasn't happy. I don't like the Eagles.
Okay.
I have a shirt that my wife got our kids that says, "Don't worry about it. It's not spit up." I just saw an Eagles fan. So it's just not. I'm not an Eagles fan. But I can't even say I'm happy for Saquon because he left the Giants. So whatever.
Yeah.
That's a story for another day. But anyway, whether we put this out tonight or tomorrow, I had to mention the Super Bowl. All right. Paige and Azzi showed up. They both scored 20 and 17 respectively against Providence. Great, but does it matter in a game like this? Paige only had 14 versus Tennessee. How can they find this play in big games?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest question that is really unanswered because, in a game like against Providence, we know that Paige is going to be able to put up, these kinds of numbers. I think the biggest thing is just figuring out, okay, like how can we work her when she's off the ball? How can we create easier shots for her, easier opportunities? But even that, I just feel like, I don't know, I just obviously am not super pleased with her play in some of these bigger games. And I think it's all great and dandy when you play Big East teams, the crowds are usually pretty decent. But other than that, I think there's a lot of questions surrounding how can we get them going. And the answer, I don't know it. And I don't think anyone really does know it because it still hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, no, I think answer comes down to consistency, right? In mental toughness. We've talked about this a little bit, and I know some people were really fired up after the Tennessee loss on the live show that you and I did. And Gino finally addressed that. We didn't talk about it on that show because we were talking in the middle of his press conference probably.
Right.
But he did say stuff like, I don't care how many assists Paige had. I think you know what I think it is, and I'm kind of going off script here, but I just completely honest, and then you tell me what you think. I think people get enamored with the efficiency stuff, and they forget that you still have to put the ball in the hole.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be honest, I was up on Friday. Sorry I didn't see you, but when I saw the banana boys and girls, the suits were pretty awesome. But what I would say is, take Alex Caravan for example. I know he's not Paige Bueckers, and it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it's the same mindset. If your thought process is perfection, and your thought process is I have to be efficient versus just do whatever you have to do to win, then that can kind of mess with your approach. Do you think that Paige has kind of, I want to say fallen in love with her efficiency, but people get comfortable. You know what I mean? You get comfortable in that role of, hey, I score 20 something points a game, but also I shoot 70%. So I don't take any bad shots, and I don't force the issue ever. Do you think that's part of it?
I don't know if that's part of it, because I think at the end of the day, I'm sure she recognizes, listen, I'm just not doing enough and not scoring enough to put our team in positions to win in big games. I think there's just a lot kind of on the line for her. I know we're gonna, kind of get into that, but I think it's just really all the mental, like, just her being put under a microscope. I think
Sure.
she just hasn't been able to, you know, step up into the light and come up when they need it big. Um, and I don't even I think obviously, like we said, like, assists are great, but I think she wants to score points. I don't think she's the complacent type, if that makes sense.
Yeah, do you think there's more like internal problems with this team, like a lack of rotation? Because we talked about in like the pre-show, like between players like Allie and Cadence, KK's minutes have kind of jumped up a little bit, but it seems like there's kind of like some rotational issues where they're trying to balance that player development. But no one really truly knows what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Gino's got these tight rotations. It's nothing new. What about that? What about the maybe there's some potential internal problems with this team?
You know, it's interesting because I've kind of taken a look at obviously the spread of minutes. Allie yesterday in a game that was really not a close one. I mean, it was what, a 37-point victory, 77 to
Mhm.
40. Allie got 11 minutes and Cadence got 6 minutes. And in a game where your opponent only scores double digits in 1 out of 4 quarters, which was a third quarter, I don't really understand why players like that, younger players that need minutes in these, kind of easy coast, games that you're going to coast against. They need minutes so you can trust them in big games like Tennessee, or if you see Notre Dame or
Right.
USC again, or whoever it might be, because 11 minutes now is going to look like, no minutes like we saw against Tennessee, because they can't
Sure.
they haven't been given a fair opportunity, a fair chance to develop. Um, I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. That's the only thing that really could explain that, is maybe something's going on internally where, the writing's on the wall, where maybe Cadence has talked about transferring. I don't know about Allie. She's still a freshman, so that's definitely, I wouldn't see her, walking away from UConn, or anything like that. But the only thing I think is maybe Cadence is thinking about
Yeah. Maybe.
transferring, and they just figure, why are we gonna get her in the rotation if we're not gonna have her next year? Gotta look to the future. I just feel like there's gotta be something that, even in games like either whether it's a blowout or whether it's Tennessee, where you just can't figure anything out offensively, like, why not try something different? And I know
Yeah.
Gino's a stubborn guy, but
Yeah. And
yeah.
I get that. Like I totally understand the like the willingness, and this is me. This is because I've asked this question before of coaches. Like, why wouldn't you just do that? Like, why wouldn't you just kind of like switch it, right? And I don't know. Like, I think there is such a stubbornness to go away from the things that got you there. And so I think that there's also and I think anybody that's self-aware, I think are the two coaches that coach at UConn are self-aware. I think Gino and Dan are very self-aware. So I think they would both agree that they have blind spots when it comes to certain things. And I think Gino in particular, because he's been doing it longer, would probably acquiesce to it more, because he's softened as time has gone on. He's not the young, fiery coach that he was, when I had Maria Conlon on. We were talking about the dynasty years against Tennessee and all of that.
Mhm.
So, like, kind of Grandpa Gino, I think, would understand like what we're saying, like in terms of like, yeah, I mean, I guess we could throw spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. But I also think like he kind of, it's what's the term, like, Google me, you know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
know how to win. So like, I think that there's probably a mixture of both. So like the old Gino would probably agree, the older in terms of like when he was young. The newer guy right now might be like, yeah, you guys might be onto something there. So I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing. I know he's trying to work to figure it out. And when we return, we are going to dive into some of Paige's struggles, not performing in big games, and we're going to hand over the reins to Bella on the hosting duties. So right after the break, we're going to come right back on Locked On UConn. Oh, FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get into the game than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, even if you miss the opening tip or if you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even get your combined live bets into a same game parlay. If you love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team or for a late game or, picking a player to hit a clutch three, whatever you want to do, I never feel like I miss any chance to make some money or make the game more exciting. Plus, the app is easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your payout. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you just win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel and the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Here you go, Bella.
All right. So, we talked a little bit before about Paige's kind of newfound struggles. This year just hasn't necessarily been her year. She's averaging about 18 points on the season. Didn't look great against Tennessee at all. We talked about, having a decent assist to turnover ratio, things like that. But again, we talk about her having to put the ball in the hole at the end of the day. Only had 14 points in a game like that. And I think it's for me, what I've seen is she just looks off, not only on the court, but just like even on the bench, even in warm-up. She seemed to have lost her spark in so many ways. And she just doesn't seem as cheery as she once was wearing that UConn uniform. And she just, I don't know, is she having a fun time? I think is something that I've been having to ask myself. And I get it, right? We have to kind of think about it. She's 23 years old and she's lived, and been in the spotlight for so long, since was in high school. Has ton of, media opportunities for her, plenty of videos, like Overtime. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Mark. Overtime, the the media platform, whatever. But she's always, grown up in the public eye. And now, as of recent, I feel like there's a lot of rumors speculating on, who she may or may not be dating. And also, I mean, this past off season, she had a stalker, and that kind of went into legal battles and things like that. So before this season even started, I mean, she was already, I mean, how are you not overwhelmed by that? You know what I'm saying? I can't obviously speak for her, but definitely very overwhelming. So what does that kind of mean for you? Do you think that earlier, things that happened back in September, October has kind of affected her play now?
Yeah, I think you can. I think I think just I know she had an off season where she got to work out and not have to rehab, so that's helpful. But all you have to do is go to our Substack, Hoops Capital of the World, and T. Baker wrote a piece about kind of Paige's entire career, about the ups and downs, the National Player of the Year as a freshman, then hurt, then kind of bouncing back, then hurt again. So I feel like that in itself is taking a toll on her physically. So even if we took away the mental aspect of the game, which is impossible, if we just took Paige's basketball, body, if you will, right? When you're that freshman of the year and you're that spectacular player that kind of takes over women's basketball and is literally the national freshman of the year, a national player of the year as a freshman, that's what I'm trying to say. And then your body starts to break down as you get older. I mean, she's not 40 like, some of us are, but at 23, her body's got to feel like it's 33 between the knees and the mental stress and everything that comes with it. I used to joke around with a buddy of mine who's now a coach someplace else in the men's game. We would play tennis, and he's had multiple knee surgeries on his left knee. And I would say, "How old are you? Aren't you 30?" And he was like, "Yeah, but my knees feel like they're like 60." So like the issue is, it's not excuses. The reality is Paige used to have a burst and an explosion that was unmatched in the women's game in terms of, kind of what you see from Juju Watkins right now, that ability to kind of get a shot whenever she wants it. I think Paige can do that still, but she's got to be a little more of a technician, got to be a little savvier. You can see it with a lot of players in this UConn team. Azzi, with Aubrey Griffin. Like even in the Tennessee game, Aubrey gave them like so much off the bench. But even on some of these like putbacks where, older Aubrey or younger Aubrey before knee surgeries would have easily put the ball back in the hole for a layup and missed a bunch. You're seeing some of the effects of that with Janelle Elfie. I know she's a freshman, but she's, essentially been here for a while, and she's coming off of an ACL tear. I know it's later in the year, but that has residual. Like the things that you could do, you can't do it to the capability that you used to do. So even if we talk less about the mental aspect, which I think is a huge aspect, especially with like the stalker and how crazy that was, I just think that Paige's body is not the same as it was, and anytime you have multiple knee surgeries, it's never going to be the same. And that's one of the reasons why I brought the whole, like, should she go number one? And my answer was probably not, because if she gets hurt at the next level, it's going to be really hard to come back.
I agree with that. I definitely do. And I think, obviously we're looking to the future, but in this season, if we're staying kind of grounded here a little bit, what does UConn need to, get out of her? How can she finish out her career here? Does she have to win a championship to kind of be considered one of those UConn greats in the sense of like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. And then also, what do we hope to see to come tournament time? What does she need to do to finally be like, all right, you know what? No matter what the ups and downs, she finished strong. Because the one thing that I look at is like, the biggest thing for me is, I think we talked about the Super Bowl earlier. The Chiefs, everybody at the beginning of their dynasty wanted them to win. And now last night, everybody, not necessarily you, but everybody's rooting against them. And it's almost like, that dark, I want to see the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen The Dark Knight Rises, where they're like, you either die a hero or you live long enough to be the villain. Has she kind of exhausted the, best player in the women's bracket? And is she kind of becoming just a memory?
No, I agree with you. It's a great movie, by the way. Good quote. I think for me, they got to get her in some more action with Sarah, and get her in action where you have Azzi and another shooter that are spread out on wings. And I'm going to nerd out and talk a little basketball, but like not just like the platitudes of like she needs to do this mentally and all this other stuff. She needs to get the ball like middle ball screen, even if she's not coming off of the top of the key. And Sarah's got to use her big frame and pick off that player, and they got to play a 2-man game. And whether it's a dribble handoff, whether it's kickouts, whether she can go all the way to the hole, pull ups, whatever she needs to do, get the girl on her hip and drive to her right, which she always seems to do better anyway, and do patented pull up mid range game for Paige, and literally just work off of that. If they show too early, you're dumping it to Sarah down low for an easy bucket, or you're letting her go to work. Probably if they switch, you're giving it to Sarah all day, because she's gonna have a mismatch against whoever Paige is guarding her, whoever Paige was guarding at that time. So I just think that's it. They just have to. They talked about simplifying the offense against these better teams. You have to do that, because they could have 50,000 different actions and plays against South Carolina, but the only thing that matters is that they get a win. I don't care if they win by it's 51-50, and it's the ugliest game you've ever seen in your life. If they get a win, the narrative changes. If they lose this game, then unfortunately it's going to be another one of those games where you're like, okay, cool, we beat all these bad teams, but we can't beat a good team. The only two teams that they played this year that you could consider that has a chance of making the Final Four and making a run is North Carolina. They beat them pretty sound early in the year, and I think North Carolina's gotten better from that game. UConn has not. They've kind of stayed around the same.
Yeah,
and maybe Iowa State. And Iowa State was under, I think they were ranked too high to begin with. They weren't as good. Audie Crooks is really good, but they don't have anything around her. Yeah. So I just can't like give them credit. Like Creighton, they're decent, but they're not that good. And they gave us some trouble on the road. So it's not Paige and Azzi need to step up, but they need to start doing it in ways that is aggressive and using the three of those, that kind of like triumvirate to really attack these defenses they're playing.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best way to break it down. I like the idea of the 2-man game. I think like you have Sarah and Paige, who have probably two of the best IQs in women's basketball right now. I mean, they just see the game differently than anybody else. And I've said this 1,000 times about Paige, and I think Sarah's finally, I mean, Sarah, I'm finally able to say this about her in the sense of like, she can pass the ball, I would almost say just as good as Paige. And
Yeah.
I think
Well,
if you work them
Ella,
together.
what about this? What about the reverse? What if Sarah had the ball in her hands? Because a lot of people don't like the fact that Paige handles the ball because it takes away from her ability to score. Do the reverse of that. I mean, LeBron screens still. Like it's not like he's the one calling over screens all the time. Sometimes he screens and fades out for a three. Like, what about that? If someone if you're trying to create mismatches, basketball is not a hard sport. Put the ball in the hole. How do you do it? Right. So if you have two of the best, probably two of the top 10 players in the country on your team, in Paige and Sarah, and you're not using them together to create kind of like these paralysis by analysis decisions by the defensive teams, if you can just key in on Paige, then clearly the game is easier for the defense. But now if you put them in an action where it's like, what, pick your poison, Sarah or Paige, they just have to do it.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And then that allows opportunities for players like Azzi, even Ashlyn Shade, who had a decent game yesterday with 12 points. I just think like they're making things too complicated. And like you said, break it down. It's basketball, right? You don't have to, it's not rocket science or anything like that. Like figure it out. And I'm sure they will improve a little bit come tournament time, because I think that South Carolina game, they have a decent amount of time to prepare for it. They don't have anything standing in their way. They're going to win the Big East matchups that they have coming. But I don't know. I just think that same thing with Pages. Things have to happen. And I asked the question to you. I kind of threw multiple questions at you, but I do think she needs that championship. She needs that championship.
Let me ask you a question, because you asked about, is she now kind of like, I wouldn't call her a villain, but maybe people aren't like rooting for her as much.
Right.
I think I see this on both sides, the men's and the women's side. Do you think NIL has a big part in why people have a different perspective on when players struggle? Whether, because do you think about the two biggest stars on both the men's and women's side? Paige is the biggest on the women's side. Then you'd probably have to go down the list on women's and then go to the men. But if you go to the men's side, Alex Caravan is a two-time national champion. Came back, didn't go in the NBA, and was like, all right, let's try to run it back and do a three-peat. And he struggled.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that he is either the highest paid player on the UConn men, or tied at least.
Easily.
So, and Paige is the highest paid player on the women's side. Do you think that's part of the reason why John Q. Public gets so riled up about when they don't play well? It's like, well, maybe if they weren't focused on NIL, and like you never hear that when you win. So that's like, true. Is that part of why you think that is happening?
I do think it takes the pressure off them in a little bit. It's not as high stakes, because now you're like, well, I already kind of made
it.
You already made it. Of dollars.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars. And that's not even like, 10 years ago, imagine talking about college kids making millions of dollars. But
well, it happened. We just didn't know about it.
Well, yeah, true. Johnny Manziel, all that, among others. But yeah, I do think that, if I'm going home, I'm going to go get a nice meal after this, not worry about how it's getting paid for, and go home to my probably $100 sheets and not really have to worry about money and things like that. I do think it makes a difference. And there was a story, I can't remember, my mom mentioned it to me a while ago about, I think it might have been Shabazz Napier at the time, and he said that they would get out of practice and worry about like getting a bagel, getting food.
Yeah.
And nowadays that's just not the story. So they had to work for something, work to earn their spot, work to get media coverage and things like that, to maybe get a contract in the NBA, G League at worst, and they don't have to worry about that anymore. So now at the end of the day, it's like, well, I made money, I had a fun career. Not to say that that's what Paige or Alex are
we don't know.
But subconsciously, I can't lie. I mean, I'm about their age, and that's how I would kind of, I'd be like, all right, obviously I work for it, but it's tough,
Yeah, but I also think too, if like the flip side of that, and then we'll get to the next topic. But the flip side of that is, the reason why I bring that up is because I think people need to have some perspective. Whether you want to call college anymore or semi-pro or whatever, people are getting paid because they're working and they're worth. You're worth what you can get. Put it that way, right? Whether people want to argue that and say nobody's worth, $1 billion or nobody's worth this, that, and the other thing, that's a story for another day. I don't want to get into that. But if someone wanted to pay me $2 million to host this podcast, I would do it without question, and I would do it with a big smile on my face.
100%.
And it also would not make me less of a hard worker. I think Paige and Alex have proven, in particular, with what they've done at this level, that they work hard, or else they wouldn't be where they're at.
Absolutely.
Now, on the men's side, you could say, well, Alex has at least won titles, sure, but he also hasn't had the same burden that Paige has had, because he has only been the number one option for half a season. You've seen what the results have been. So I think it's very fair for people to question people's motivations once they start getting good sums of money.
Mhm.
But I also think it's unfair when it's lazy, when it's just like, that's the whole reason. I
100%.
think that's the clarification.
I agree. And I don't want to get killed or anything in the comments or, whatever. I don't want anyone to think. I do think, I'm a firm believer that athletes should get paid for the name on
Sure.
their back, because that is what this school makes money off of, right? Paige coming to UConn has made them in ticket sales and in
Millions.
viewership, millions, and whatever numbers you want to talk about it. Same with
Tens of
Caravan.
millions.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't want to say that they shouldn't.
Did you see that Super Bowl commercial?
They had a Paige
Jalen
and
Stewart and Paige.
Yep, Jay Stu and Paige. And I believe that they should be paid. I just think that, especially a younger person would get a little bit complacent. And I'm not
Sure.
saying that it's intentional. I'm saying a little subconsciously. There's just, like I said, just a little bit less pressure to succeed, in my opinion.
I don't disagree. All right, when we return, we'll make a quick break. No ads this time. And Bella's going to take us home with one last topic. You're locked on. All right, back on Locked On UConn with your host, Mark Zanetto, Bella Tomato, who's capital of the world. All right, here we go.
Yeah, so I think our last thing we want to talk about is just the Big East Blues, as we've named it. It's unfortunate for the UConn women to have to play in a conference like this, and that's the only way I'm going to put it. The men, honestly, this year have really been tested by the Big East, and I think it's really prepared them in the years past, in the last two championships that they've won. But the women are not tested. They don't really have any competition. We talked about Creighton, which they'll probably be a tournament team. But beyond that, there's no other teams in the Big East that I think are projected to make it. Almost half of the teams in the Big East Conference for the women are below 500. And I think we really have to realize, what good is coming out of these games. And it doesn't really tell us anything, Mark. That's the biggest thing for me. And, even though we dominate and do exactly what we're supposed to do and hold teams to lower scores and we play well, what does it really mean for us as a team?
Not much. It's kind of like, this is a gross analogy, but my buddy used to say that's whipped cream on horse manure, right? So it's like, it's gross either way, right? It's like, just because you put something that you would normally like by itself on something that stinks, it still stinks. Yeah. So it's just like, that always used to make me laugh. But at the same time, I just don't, the answers aren't as easy as going to the ACC or emerging, or even kind of, tucking and running for the Big 12, because I don't know, I'm starting to kind of acquiesce to the idea of the Big East has an opportunity to, there's different ways to do this, right? The on the women's side, and let's focus on that because that's what this show is about. The women need to, it's in their best interest for Gino and his staff to essentially reach out to the Big East Conference and say, hey, do you need a blueprint on how to maximize the potential for the rest of the Big East schools? It's not that we want you to beat us. It's that we want you to be competitive enough so these games aren't a joke. And I think that that's something that it's incumbent on the leaders of women's college basketball. And if it's a conference in particular, the Big East, that's UConn. If UConn was the third best team in this league, then the hell with it, whatever. But they have by far and away been the best best team in this conference for a multiple years since Notre Dame left. And you have to make some investments. And if they're not willing to do it, then I don't know what they do, because on the men's side, I think that they're waiting out to see what happens, because there's a school of thought that if you keep football kind of at bay and they just keep playing the teams that they're playing, like the Florida Atlantics, not the Boston Colleges every once in a while, not playing a really tough schedule, then you can put a ton of money once the rev share model comes in. Essentially, I was talking to a buddy of mine who coaches in Texas, and he was talking about how these Big East schools, if they're smart, they'll wait it out, and in about 3 years, they'll all have about $6 or $7 million rosters because of NIL, and they'll all be the best. They'll be the best basketball conference in the country. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's an interesting take, because if all of the big pool of money is going to football, and if UConn does this, that's what it would do. Then that would take money away from the women's basketball, would take money away from men's basketball. We'd have more per se, but you're still not, you're going to be treated like second-class citizens when you go to the Big 12 or the ACC. But if you stay in the Big East, you're kind of the big fish, and you can continue to kind of show people how to do it. So I think it's like a double-edged sword. They either go someplace else and get the instant gratification, or they stay, in the conference that made them. And even when they took that detour to the American, they come back and help the Big East even more. I think it's time to give back a little bit and try to get this conference where it should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the other thing we have to look at is I think you said it was the first time in 10 years that UConn hasn't had a top 10 recruit.
Yeah.
I do think, at the end of the day, obviously winning is great, but some of these players are going to want to be challenged. And when they've seen what UConn's done, you've done great in the Big East, but there's no competition there. It's going to turn people off and make them not want to come.
Look at South Carolina. They just got beat by Texas.
100%. A lot, and it's great. That's a great thing. That is a
great win for Texas. Yep.
And we talked about it in South Carolina. They're going to be fine. And it doesn't matter that they really lost that game, because they're probably, unless they lose to UConn, and I don't see them losing any other games, probably going to be probably going to be the number one seed. Well, they're definitely going to get a number one seed, but they could potentially get the undisputed number one seed.
See what happens with UCLA.
Yeah, time will tell. Time will tell. But I think recruits, definitely that could be a turnoff. And I think the current players that we have here, a lot of it's just stat padding at this point and increasing their record.
Let me ask you this question about stat padding and the players they're on right now. So let's say you are on this team and you're actually a pretty good player or whatever, and you're unhappy with the competition. You only get to play a couple of big games all year, and then I think that this is almost like blasphemy, but I think it's a fair question. If you're not showing what you can do at the highest level, then even if you want to transfer, who's to say that South Carolina or Texas or UCLA wants said player? Because if they don't only see you play against Providence and Seton Hall, who's to say you can be as effective a player against these SEC or Big Ten schools? Yeah. So that could start to have some these little holes in the hull of the boat, so to speak. So that's something to think about too. And I don't know. It's got to be frustrating for Gino and Chris and the staff, but it's also kind of one of those things where I tell my kids this all the time. You can only control what you can control. Yeah. The schedule is the schedule. There's nothing that they can do about. They can't just add 4 or 5 really good games at the end of the year. It just is what it is. Yeah. South Carolina is it. That's their Super Bowl. Play it like it is, and just kind of see if you can get that win.
Yeah. No, I think that's the thing. And at this point in time, I almost feel like almost every Big East game we've played is garbage time, literal garbage time, because there's no real competition. And I know you said with transfer and things like that, do you think that, if UConn were in a bigger conference, would they still be regarded as a top 10 team? Would players like Azzi and Paige still be great and put up these great numbers if they had to play, say, be in the Big Ten and play USC twice a year, or be in the ACC and play Notre Dame twice a year? Do you think they would be as good as we consider them now?
I think so. Maybe their stats would drop a little bit. I think you'd see some of the lesser players stats drop. I don't think like everyone says, well, Ashlyn Shade, she was the Big East freshman of the year. And like, no disrespect to Ashlyn. That's in almost any other year. It's an incredible achievement.
Mhm.
But and she had a nice NCAA tournament. But like,
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying? Like, it's not as if like you know, she was Sarah Strong from last year. So it's obvious to see that, you know, matchup based, whenever they play a team like a Tennessee that's more athletic and longer and quicker, they struggle. When they play against these, like, feels like they're walking in cement teams that are in the Big East, they look amazing because they don't have to do as much. All right, Bella, we're going to close out the show. Awesome stuff. I really appreciate it. By the way, this entire show was written and produced by Bella Tamano. So kudos to her. So if you love it, give her props. If you hate it, don't yell at me. I'm kidding.
I'll take
listen,
it. I'll take it.
No, take it. Yeah, you did. It was a phenomenal stuff. And I'm gonna put this out tomorrow morning, first thing in the morning. I know it's like a day late, but I also wanted to run all day. And then be on the lookout for a UConn Creighton men's basketball preview around like 1 or 2 o'clock for the 9 o'clock game. And then a live reaction show if I'm still awake, which I likely will be later on tomorrow. All right, y'all. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. For Bella Tamano, I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked on, stay connected. And to remember, it's not just getting it done, it's doing it in a way that it can't be done any better. That's our goal every day. And go Huskies.